You're listening to the B&H Photography Podcast. I'm Jill Waterman, the show's creative producer. I'm also host of our new monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. What happens to a people and their culture after a once prosperous nation is overrun by chaos? How can one begin to make sense of the resulting turmoil in visual terms? These questions are at the heart of today's chat about bearing witness to the dramatic events that have gripped Venezuela in recent years. Guiding us through her process to balance documentary evidence with metaphoric elements evoking a state of mind is photographer and investigative journalist Fabiola Ferrero, who was born in Caracas in 1991. Her personal work reflects how her childhood memories contrast with Venezuela's current crisis. Using this background, she develops long-term visual projects focused on collaborative ways to speak about the human condition under hostile contexts. To bring opportunities to other emerging photographers and envision an archive on this overarching theme, in 2021, Fabiola founded Semillero Migrante. This mentorship program on the topic of migration empowers Venezuelans and Colombians and promotes the integration of both cultures. A 2018 Magnum Foundation Fellow in Social Justice, Fabiola's additional recognition includes a 2021 Inga Morath Award, a 2022 Carmagnac Photojournalism Award, and a World Press Photo Award for long-term projects, which she received in 2023. Most recently, Fabiola was a fellow at Columbia University's Institute for Ideas and Imagination in Paris. Fabiola Ferrero, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, great speaking with you today. So, historically speaking, Venezuelans are considered to be a very happy people. Based on this past assessment, what do you find to be some defining characteristics of Venezuelan people and culture?
It's very hard, obviously, to talk about a culture in general terms because it's so many different aspects that you could look into. I'd say in recent years, a word that has been used a lot to talk about Venezuelans and that I'm not a fan of is resilient. I don't usually like this word because sometimes it is used to romanticize the fact that when people are resilient, it's basically because they have no choice but to be resilient. And if people have been following the story on Venezuela since 2014, we've been going through one of the deepest crises in our history. And so that word keeps coming up to talk about how Venezuelans are. This idea of the happiest people also changed in the past few years because it's evidently very hard to keep the good spirits amidst the chaos sometimes. It's something that is also very interesting about Venezuelan culture is how mixed our culture is because of migration, because of the rapid absorption of modernity that came with the oil boom in the second half of the 20th century. So we have, for instance, a really big migration movement that came from Italy, from Spain, from Portugal. And we also absorbed a lot of the American values in a lot of ways because of the close relationships that Venezuela and the United States had during the oil boom from the 50s until the late 80s. So you could say that it's a mix of cultures, really.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So you mentioned the crisis in 2014, but actually a lot of difficult times came earlier than that. In 2002, when you were about 11 years old, Venezuela suffered a coup d'etat. And I read somewhere that you and your brother went up to the roof of your high-rise apartment and you play-acted being a reporter describing the protests down below at that time. Were you drawn to reporting and journalism before these events occurred, or was that the primary catalyst that led to your subsequent career?
Yeah, I am not sure I have such a clear timeline, but because in my mind, I have always known to a certain extent that I wanted to do some kind of journalism. I had no idea it was going to be photography. I thought it was going to be, maybe like working on TV, but something that would break my bubble. I was drawn to that. So I think it was journalism that really became my way to do that. From my early years, I think I was more drawn to the arts. So acting, I also did gymnastics. So I love like to perform. I actually started writing before I became a photographer. So it was all these different ways to express myself. And then eventually just journalism. But I think those years, 2002, like the early Chavismo days, definitely played a really, really important role on me becoming a journalist over time.
Mm-hmm. And at what point did you get access to a camera and add photography to the mix?
I had one little camera when I was like 13. It was just like a point and shoot camera that I would carry around. The first time that I actually started to take pictures was when I was in college. And it was my thesis. So I wanted to write a thesis on Machurucuto. It's a very complicated name, but it's a tiny coast city where my family had a house and where I grew up. And they didn't want yet another journalism thesis that was writing about a place or people. So they told me, why don't you do a multimedia piece? Because we really need to start doing more multimedia pieces. And if you propose that, we'll say yes to the topic. So that's what I did. So I was like basically forced into learning how to properly use a camera. And that was the very first time that I started photographing. My grandfather was a photographer, though.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah, I never met him. So he died before I was born. But of course, I grew up with a lot of images, a lot of portraits of my mom, just boxes and boxes. And even today, maybe that's why I also am so drawn to archive, because I grew up surrounded by pictures and pictures and pictures that he would take.
Was he a portrait photographer?
He wasn't a professional photographer at all. He just liked it. He was a barber.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. An Italian from the south of Italy who migrated to Venezuela because it was back then the land of opportunities. And yeah, he just carried a camera with him, and I still have it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
What kind of camera?
A Rolleiflex.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I actually want to start a project with that camera. I just have it, like taking care of it and thinking if it's a good idea or not. But yeah.
Yeah, they're fun to photograph with.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
A whole different dynamic. So the thesis project you did, what kind of pictures were you taking?
It was essentially just showing this town and daily life in this little town, Machurucuto. It was like a general portrait of the place. So I would go to the fisherman and I would go to the artists of the town. It was very simple, I think, but I was also trying to bring to the attention of people a larger story about this town that was a place where there was a Cuban invasion during the 60s. So there was also like some political stories behind it that I wanted to tell back then, which also later became like a general topic, also like bringing politics, but through just daily life stories, I guess.
Right. Well, I read that one barrier you had to overcome as a photographer was an incredible sense of shyness you had.
Yeah.
And you talked about this on the podcast, Visual Minds. Yet some of your earliest pictures document protests and clashes in the streets, which must have required an incredible amount of boldness on your part. Can you talk about how you navigated the contrast between these two emotional states?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can be shy and bold at the same time. But yeah, when I was starting doing this project that I mentioned in Machurucuto, I remember like the mentor that I had for the thesis, he told me, I don't see any people in your picture. So we need to work this out because I only see the beach and I only see the church and I'm not seeing any faces. So what's going on with that? And it was because of that, because I was very shy and I didn't know how to approach people. If I approached them, then I wouldn't want to take pictures because I didn't want to be invasive. And so it's something that I had to like work on for years. And I think it got better when I also started to understand maybe it's not shy, the word. Maybe it's just introvert, the quiet nature of my personality, I think. Because when I have to talk about my work, I can do it in front of an audience. And you have to conduct a lot of interviews. You have to connect with people. So it's not that I'm shy. I think to me, it's less about being a very outgoing person and more about really getting to know people and building a slower connection and using that honesty and that slow personality to connect on other ways. So that actually, I started to see that as a strong part of my personality as a photographer. and not so much of a setback as I used to see it before.
Right.
But it was definitely something that I had to train and learn to overcome. The fact of doing that first approach and talking to people. I don't think that's much of a problem anymore, but it was for my early years.
Hmm. So does that involve spending a good amount of time talking to someone before you bring out the camera or ask to take pictures?
100%. And I also think that's why I choose to do more long-term projects. That's why I work in like stuff that allows me to not be in a rush,
Hmm.
because I don't want to make anybody feel forced to participate in any of my projects. And if there's a dialogue and the person truly doesn't want to be photographed, then I don't see why I should be forcing a story or forcing a connection with anyone. But you have to also have time to really accept that a story that you really want to do won't happen, and then you can go and find someone else and talk to someone else and keep trying and keep trying and that takes time.
Right, right, right.
But that's why I do long projects.
Yeah, yeah. So as things in Venezuela got worse, your family members migrated to other countries one by one until you were the only one left in Caracas. That must have left a huge hole in your life. What was it that made you stay?
Well, I think like many photographers, when a lot of people are running away from something, we tend to go towards that same thing.
Mm,
And in my case, it just felt completely wrong, the idea of leaving in such an important moment. So I was indeed feeling very devastated on a personal level because I didn't have like my closest family. Most of my friends by then also left. On top of that, the general political tension, it was also heavy to deal with. But I think it was a very deep sense of commitment to my country's history and to build a memory of that over time. I think that's why I stayed.
So, what resources did you have at that point in terms of both physical and psychological support?
Yeah, well, I had a pretty amazing partner at the time,
Mm,
who was a really important emotional support, and we were both supporting each other. I had my family abroad, so even if they were far away, just having them being supportive was also quite important.
hmm. So, communication was not too difficult. You could keep in touch.
Yeah, we
Um,
would have like calls for sure.
mhm.
I think this is something that maybe photographers in general don't like to talk about, but I had a good therapist, walking with me along the way, and I still have her. And so I think that's also important. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. So, I want to ask about this diary entry that you published on your Instagram feed about a point when you returned to your family's beach house after being away for 5 years. And you found a huge wasp nest on the roof and dead wasps all over the inside of the house. And that made me curious about just the overall breakdown of the country's infrastructure and what can happen when, people leave and something's vacant for such a long period of time. Are there other examples of those kind of infrastructure changes that you can talk about?
Yeah, I think you can see it pretty much everywhere. Especially in recent years, I focused a lot on infrastructure because that is one of the most evident symbols of that prosperity that came with the oil boom. So you can see that these weren't just any kind of buildings or structures. There were structures that showed the ideals of progress that Venezuela had up until late 80s. So you can see that, for instance, in the oil structures in Lake Maracaibo, or you can see that in Parque Central, this place in Caracas. It was considered one of the biggest infrastructures in Latin America and one of the most important cultural centers in Latin America during the 80s, and nowadays is essentially abandoned. So I think you can see that and of course all the houses that migrants leave behind, which is a phenomenon that happens mostly with the middle class families that leave the country.
Hmm.
So it's pretty much everywhere, I think.
Mm-hmm. So in 2015, you started working on a long-term personal project called Blurred in Despair. And the images are all in black and white. And you mix journalistic documentation with more conceptual images. which balances the tough scenes with a sense of lyricism. What was your process in deciding on the image sequence that was shown on your website, and how long did it take to come to that selection?
Well, the selection of that particular project, I don't remember exactly, but I usually do sequences. So if you see a sequence, you'll probably see that there's like one to make you go into this mental state or like a more emotional state. And then you go to the protests and you see all of this. And then you go to more death related images. And so I build like these different sequences to create like a bit of a symphony and not be high all the time, but not be too slow all the time. Just like trying to build a rhythm on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that musical reference is really apt. So, are there different edits of that project in those pictures, or has it been shown in different forms, or is that sequence on your website basically your final interpretation of that?
No, no, no. It's been shown in different ways, in different formats. And actually, some of those images over time also became part of the project that I finished a few years ago, which is I Can Hear the Birds. And it's in color. And I know some people hate this, but a really good advantage of digital photography is the fact that I was working on that specific chapter in black and white, but then it became part of I Can Hear the Birds, which is in color. And it became part of the same narrative over time. So it's part of 6 years of investigation. It's just that one chapter was made in black and white.
Right,
And now it serves the story better that it became part of this other project. So I think
right.
with editing, you can literally build completely different projects depending on how you edit something. And this is something that I tell my students a lot because the edit does so much to what you want to say with your story. And you can have the same 80 pictures. And if you choose 15 of one type of images, you have one project. And if you choose completely different images, you'll have a completely different project. And so to me, the editing process is so, so, so important in really building your project.
Hmm.
I think sometimes even more than the actual production process,
Yeah,
because it can really make or break your project in so many ways.
for sure. There's something about, well, especially your later work, I Can't Hear the Birds. I keep coming to the word texture and making image selections that add not just this sense of lyricism or this musical sense, but almost this textural sense where, it's like the difference between the black and white and color, or the difference between archival pictures and contemporary pictures, where there's really this tactile sense of different textures. Do you feel that about your edits?
Yeah.
It's funny because I've never thought of it before that way. I mean, editing is something that I find really important as well, and I think about it a lot, and I think about it often in musical terminology. But when looking at your work, the word texture just kept coming up in my mind.
Mm. When I talk about editing, I talk about the selection of the images, not necessarily the retouch or the kind of mood they have.
Right.
But somebody did mention the other day in an exhibition that they found a little funny that Venezuela being this very colorful Caribbean country, all my pictures were like a bit desaturated. You don't see like a bright blue sky in most of my pictures. And if you see the macaw, what we call the guacamaya, this very colorful bird that is all over our capital in Caracas, they
Right.
just go to people's houses and they're everywhere. The one picture that I included of that bird, it's actually under the rain on a storm. So the symbol of this very colorful city and country is actually under the rain on a storm.
Mhm.
I am not entirely sure that that is a conscious decision, but it's definitely part of what I internalized as part of the project, which is building a mood and an atmosphere that in this case was about loss and grief,
Right.
and the grief of an idea, not necessarily the grief of the country itself. I think my project really points to the grief of losing the idea of the country that we thought we had to have in the future that we thought we were going to have because we were this really big oil country. So there is a texture and there is a certain color palette that aligns with that idea.
Mhm. Yeah, it's fascinating. So in 2016, you left Venezuela to visit your brother in Spain for about 6 months, and you returned in 2017. How did your perception of your homeland change due to your time away?
I think mostly it changed how I related to it and how I related to photography. So I started to understand how to connect my inner world with what was happening around me. And when I was in
Mm,
Spain in 2016, I think this was never diagnosed, but I think I had a little bit of PTSD or something of that sort because I was having nightmares. I was waking up screaming at night. I couldn't walk on the streets. If somebody would pass me really fast, I would be very scared. And so I started to understand until what point really I was being affected mentally by the whole situation in my country. And when I was away, I read this study that was called the emotional map of Venezuelans and how people were experiencing sadness, anger, and
mm,
fear um, on a daily basis, essentially. And that's what really made me connect. Well, maybe what I am feeling, it's also like a general feeling in the country and how I can use my very personal experience to connect with something that is wider and goes beyond myself. And so I went back, and that's when I did Learn Despair, which is this black
mhm.
and white project. Before that, I was mostly doing press conferences and very straight photojournalism. But in Barcelona, I did this small project that I think not a lot of people have seen, which is called Oblivion. And it's mostly self portraits and diary entries
Mm,
and that mental state that I was living. So I think, yeah, I became obsessed with the idea of mental states and emotional states and how to portray feelings and
mhm.
sense of loss in general. But it was in that time away. And in general, I think it's on those breaks
Yeah.
when I really understand the ideas that I want to pursue. The same happened after I left Venezuela in 2020. Also, being away for a period of time during the pandemic gave me a broader sense of what I was doing in Venezuela, for sure. Silence is important.
Definitely. And silence can be really powerful when it's used well. So there's another question I wanted to ask about your project, I Can't Hear the Birds. When working on this project, you wrote, Venezuela is not a country anymore, but a state of mind. And you are trying to make pictures that you describe as an extension of your inner self and a process of making feelings visible. What kinds of visual elements or situations work best for you in communicating something so ephemeral as a state of mind in photographic images?
Yeah, that is tricky. And I think depending on who sees the project, they might feel it. They might not. I don't know. I really hope it comes across. But I do use, for instance, I repeat a certain metaphoric image, which is stuff that are either broken or eaten by termites, for instance.
Mm,
There's one image that keeps repeating. So you see a highway that it's broken, or you see somebody that has a scar on her forehead, or you see this wall that has a crack on it. And this thing that keeps repeating is like something that broke, not just
mhm,
physically,
mhm.
but internally. So those kinds of images I try to incorporate into the documentary narrative because they are also obviously the more straightforward
Yeah.
images. And finding the balance between the two is very tricky because you can either go very straightforward and very photojournalism, or you can go into way too conceptual and then nobody will understand. So, like finding the balance, I think it's important.
Yeah, it's all about the balance. And the other element that kept coming up for me was the images that show either smoke or mist or these sort of
Yeah.
ephemeral atmospheric effects that are really beautiful, lyrical, and balancing that against the sort of harder
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
pictures
Thank you. Thank you.
is really powerful. So after you got back to Venezuela in 2017, you were doing a lot of international assignment work, traveling to different parts of Venezuela. You photographed the Lake Maracaibo oil region and the barren farmland in Portuguesa state. What effect did the assignment work you were doing have on the direction of your personal work?
It allowed it to expand. I don't think I could have ever done the project if I didn't have the support of the editors that I worked with to really explore all these stories around the country. And a lot of the pictures from those assignments ended up being part of the actual selection of the final project. So it expanded the work in many, many ways. Um, in terms of
Mm.
gathering more material, but
Mhm.
also in like expanding my understanding of the crisis beyond the capital. Because traveling across Venezuela can be very expensive, can be very dangerous. And if you don't have the support of an editor or a safety plan that you have with someone, or going to certain places with someone and not just by yourself, those things really make the difference when you're trying to build a body of work that requires resources, that requires time. And so assignment work to me is fundamental for sure. It's very, very important.
Okay, well, I think this is a good time to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue our conversation with Fabiola Ferrero about the culture and conditions in current-day Venezuela. Stay tuned. I hope you're enjoying this chat with Fabiola Ferrero for my monthly series, Picturing World Cultures. We'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Fabiola on a very recent award she received, the 2024 Deloitte Photo Grant, an open call with the theme of possibilities. Her winning proposal for the Reñas project focuses on two aspects of Venezuela's identity: oil production and the beauty of women. Even today, the country holds the world's largest proven oil reserve and the largest number of international beauty titles. A preview of Fabiola's work for this award will be presented at the Munich Museum of Cultures in Milan, Italy, from November 7th to December 15th, 2024. Pivoting back to our interview, we'd love to hear what you think of this week's episode and about the show in general. So please leave a rating and post a review on Apple Podcasts, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you may listen. And stay tuned for my next installment of Picturing World Cultures coming up in November. Okay, we are back, and we're speaking with Venezuelan photographer Fabiola Ferrero. So in 2020, you ended up migrating to Colombia. After working in Venezuela on your own and under tough conditions for so long, what made you decide to leave at that point?
It wasn't really a decision. It wasn't a choice. I was traveling there for personal reasons. And it was March 12th. So in March 15, the pandemic was declared. And in Colombia, they said, well, we're going to do a trial lockdown. So for 15 days, nobody can leave their houses. And I think it was good for me. I think I didn't really know how much I really needed to step away from the geographical space that I was covering, because it was also the emotional space at the same time. So being away for that period of time allowed me to get some distance. And this is something that sometimes we overlook as local photographers. Sometimes we're so in it that we don't see certain things, or we don't realize how deep we are emotionally involved. And so I think that time away is what really helped me get the distance that I needed to then come back and finish the project and then do the book, The Wells Run Dry, and have the clarity of what I really wanted to look for when I was back. And to this day, I think it was the best thing for my creative process, having that time of silence and reflection. And I think if there are photography students listening, I would encourage them to really understand the importance of silence and reflection when you're doing long-term photo projects, especially if something that is very personal to you. That we are constantly feeling that we have to be producing all the time, and showing your work and getting people's attention on our social media or something. But in reality, the process gains so much when you just step back and take breaks. And that is, I think, very important in the process of doing a project.
Because you are also a writer and you write a lot about your work as well, this is something that I've always found very helpful and important. I will work on the images for a while, and then I'll step back and work on writing about the images, and that will let me see the images in a new way, and then I can go back to working on the images. Do you do that at all?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's what gives you clarity, having the words to explain it. This is also a good exercise if you're like applying to grants, for instance. They force you to really sit down and put your project into words. Just doing the exercise of looking at those questions and really put them into words is really helpful as a photographer to understand where you want to take your project. Because sometimes, even if you have written about it, you may also feel lost and you go back to your text and you read it, and it serves as a guide to not get so lost in the process. Just a little bit, maybe not so much. So, yeah, I would say that writing your ideas is very good.
So you returned to Venezuela in 2022. Was it difficult or risky for you to come back to the country as a photojournalist? Have conditions or protocols for departure and reentry changed in recent years or ever been problematic?
It depends a lot on when you want to enter the country and from where. If you want to go through the airport, if you want to go through one specific point in the border, if you want to go through the other. So it depends. And also depending on how you want to enter and what topics you're working on, etc., there are different plans. I don't think I felt at risk much because I was working a lot inside people's houses and like very intimate spaces. There are, of course, some areas in which you have to be more careful not to show your camera, for instance, not to show off that you're there. I would say the oil structures in general are always sensitive. So you have to work a bit differently there and be working low key, keeping a low profile. If the political tension is high, then it changes a lot and then you might be at risk everywhere. So you just have to be constantly checking on that.
Yeah, I was curious about how the travel worked and what kind of networks were there for travel and communications as well, especially in some of the more remote areas. How did you travel and communicate with editors and the contacts that you would set up to photograph?
I mean, you can still communicate in Venezuela. Obviously, receptions in certain areas are tricky. In certain areas, for instance, some reporters choose to bring a satellite phone. This is something that I've never done. I think it just brings more attention to you than necessary. So I just use the local Wi Fi if I have a hotel or if I have to spend a few days without talking to the editor. Sometimes I would go to areas that is simply no signal at all. So you just have to focus on your assignment and on your safety on your own. And then when you go back, you talk to the editors again or to whoever is waiting to hear from you.
And were you traveling alone in these remote areas?
Some of them, yes. Some of them I would go with reporters. And some of them I would just go by myself.
You mentioned somewhere that there was relative safety in being a woman journalist, but that it was not just for yourself, but in at least one circumstance, your presence helped keep a male colleague safer. When you made a visit to a gold mine that was run by an armed group called El Sindicato. What kind of interactions did you have with the members of this group? And how did they react to you taking pictures at the mine?
Well, first of all, they didn't allow me to take pictures, which is something that really made me question a lot about the risks that we take sometimes. I am not entirely sure how much my presence really affected the way that they treated us in general. It was something that they mentioned, that they were like very respectful towards women. And the fact that I was there with him was a good thing for both. This was a tricky assignment. And I was very, very, very young. This was my very first international assignment.
Wow. Huh.
It was unforgettable for me, I think. I was basically in this gold mine surrounded by armed men, part of this mafia that controls the gold mining in the south of Venezuela, which is an area that nowadays even the most experienced journalists in the area are not really exploring. They're not really going there anymore because the situation has evolved.
So have you had formal security training to keep yourself safe as a photojournalist?
I did after this. In 2017, I did have some security training in Spain. And I'm soon going to refresh a little bit. I'm going to have another one. I think it's very important to keep those skills updated. And I think at this point I forgot a bit. So it's good that I'm going to do a refresher.
And do you think it's something that's evolved over time, the different types of training that is given?
I do. And I also think that The priorities have changed a little bit. So if I were to ask for a specific type of training in safety, I would ask for digital safety right now, which is something that I didn't consider that much before because there's a very high level of government surveillance. It's something that I think it's important for journalists to have as well, at least in the case of Venezuela. And then also at some point it might be that you are covering protests, so you need like a specific type of training if a colleague gets injured and stuff like that. But now there's also the question, well, what happens if you get detained by government officials? Who do you need to have on the loop if you're traveling or stuff like that? So yeah, it definitely changes.
You've talked about the importance of keeping a strict protocol to stay safe as a photojournalist. What are the most essential rules you follow? And what is the safety gear that you keep close?
The security equipment to cover protests is the one that in Venezuela you have to have because you never know when they erupt. So you have your helmet, you have your gas mask, you have your vest, a good pair of shoes. And if you've done some of these trainings, you usually have like a first aid kit with you. And that's pretty much it. The rest is just the security protocol that you might follow, meaning having somebody track your location at all times, having people that are looking after you and doing check-ins every now and then, that kind of stuff.
So would you just use your phone as a tracker that somebody would follow? Or would you have an item that might be hidden that would track
No,
you?
on my phone. There's an app called Life 360 that I would recommend to journalists if they need to be tracked by someone. You give access to specific people and they can have you located. And then there are other methods. Some editors ask you to download a specific app that they use. And so they have the whole team in that app. So it depends. But Life 360 is definitely one that you can download by yourself and just have maybe a group of friends or somebody outside of where you are located. If they see that something's off, I think you can send emergency stuff or people that also have contacts that they can reach if something happens. Maybe somebody that has access to your social media. There are people who do that as well.
So what are you currently working with for cameras and lenses?
I work with many things, mostly my phone, because I do bring my phone everywhere and I take a lot of pictures with it. I have a tiny point and shoot film camera. For assignments, I usually just bring my Canon R6 with a 24-70 lens. But if it's just personal work, I usually go with a 35 and a 50 to keep it as light as possible. And I'm a Mia 7. I'm working now on a new project with a film camera. So yeah, I just work with different stuff to keep it fun.
And you said you had a small point and shoot film camera?
It's basically a toy camera. It's an Agfa photo, very tiny, very cheap, something that if I'm on the streets and it break it or somebody takes it or I forget it in a restaurant, something that I wouldn't mind just to keep it on my purse. It's a personal diary. It's not doing like a professional project with it, but it's good also to have these kind of things that reconnect you to photography in a playful way.
Your most recent project, The Wells Run Dry, for that project, you put together a team of 5 Venezuelan journalists to write stories from their hometowns. And you spent weeks working with each of them. Were you working together in person or remotely? And did you plan out a specific itinerary from the start, or did the project just come together in a more organic fashion?
Everything everywhere all at once. That was for the Carmignac Award. So I had this very big Excel sheet. Also highly recommend using Excel photographers. I know we love to be very intuitive, but having a strategy and a plan really does help when you have a deadline, when you have a production to make, when you have to put together a team. So in that case, I had this really big plan with all the cities that I wanted to visit, what places I wanted to visit in each one of them, how many days in each one of them, what producer or journalist was going to be with me in each of the areas. And then, of course, when we had this plan, because the idea of the project was this, I would also ask them, is there a particular story that you want to explore that you haven't had the chance because you don't have yet the resources? Let's use this photography grant so that you can also do the story. And so it was a mix of my general idea and their own stories that they liked. And then each of them wrote a story and we published it in Spanish in Venezuela. Also, recently, that got a nomination for Premio Gabo, which is a really important Spanish-speaking journalism award. It was in the photography category, but it was really about the individual stories that each of these journalists wrote.
Mm.
So they weren't working with each other, but I did work separately with each one of them in each of the cities that I went to.
And how did you identify the journalists that you worked with? How did you find them?
I had worked with all of them during assignments, for instance. So I knew that they were like the top journalists in Venezuela right now, each in their own area. So one is like really focused on the Amazon and gold mining. One is focused on the Andean region. One is focused on the oil structures. One is based in Caracas. And each one of them to me were like the best in that area.
Oh, that's amazing.
And they were all female journalists, by the way. It was really, really amazing to work with all of them. And it's also really good to work with journalists and photographers and editors of different generations in general. I think that is also something that I enjoy a lot.
So this recent project includes some really poignant pictures showing the widespread destruction to a university with piles of discarded books and a single professor who remains behind. And you refer to these pictures as symbols of lost prosperity and the progress of ideas. Can you talk more about this situation with this university and the professor you met and what you learned from him?
Yeah. Well, the university system in Venezuela is divided into three. So you would have the public and autonomous universities, which are the ones that are being systematically destroyed. Then you have the private ones, which people pay for, so they have their own system. And then you have the public ones that have no autonomy, that depend completely on the government in terms of even what you teach in those universities. So that's why the ones that are public but autonomous, meaning that they depend financially on the state, but they have autonomy in their decisions, those are the ones that are being systematically destroyed. And one of the pictures it's shown is this pile of books in the coast area of Sucre, which is essentially a university that was slowly taken by gangs that live around it. So during the pandemic, for instance, when it was completely abandoned, they took the university. And it's very hard to explain to people how it gets to this point. And this is something that I asked so many times when I was doing research on this. How do you go from having a university to not having anything, not even the structures, not even the doors? Everything was completely destroyed. And essentially, it just goes little by little. I have people telling me stories even from 2016 when they were still in their classrooms. Somebody would just go into the classroom with a gun and go chair by chair, give me your phones, interrupting a history class, for instance. And so what would happen is that this part of the university, which is too close to where the gangs operate, we're not going to go into this building anymore. Let's just use the rest of the university. And slowly they would take more and more area from the universities. Literally, they would take buildings over.
Wow.
Doesn't mean that they live there at all. It just means that they just come and go as they please.
Yeah.
And because the university depends financially on the state, if the state doesn't pay, then you cannot really afford to have a security guard to protect the area. So eventually what happened was that during the pandemic, when nobody was around, they would take from chairs and tables to doors, windows, and then at some point, they even started to break the walls to take the little metal pieces inside to sell it.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it got to that point.
Wow.
So essentially now that specific university, Universidad de Oriente, does not exist. And it's not just infrastructure, it's also the fact that the only ocean research center of Venezuela was located, and all of those years of research that didn't have a digital backup were lost. So it's not just infrastructure. It's also the fact that all that knowledge that was produced for decades, it's gone.
Right. Wow. So do you think there's hope for the future to somehow come back near zero from extinction?
It's very hard for me to talk about hope.
Yeah.
There's this Argentinian writer that I really like, Martín Caparrós, and in one of his books, he mentions something in the lines of migrating is leaving behind the collective dream to go chase an individual dream, basically giving up on the social part of it and just go by yourself. And when I think about hope for the future, I can only hope for the individual life of each person in Venezuela or outside Venezuela, that they can find some sort of social dimension to their dreams, that they don't feel so alone in the sense that they feel that they have to give up on everything just to fulfill their individual dreams. Either it's because Venezuela gets better and they find again that sense of community that you get with your surroundings, with the people around you, or because you left the country and you found your tribe and your community again. That is the only hope that I can really talk about at this point, because it's very tricky to talk about the future of Venezuela specifically right now.
Yeah.
So my hope, it's only that in these moments where it can be so easy to feel alone and that you can only hope for good things for yourself, we really find community again, wherever we are.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the 5 women journalists that you worked with. And you mentioned that you learned a lot from the values and the work ethic and the generosity of these women. Was there anything you learned that was totally new or surprising to you?
Not totally new, but it's always good to be reminded of the value again of community. And it's lovely that we can connect both questions that way. I think also as freelancers, we are so alone sometimes. Like we spend so much time alone. And when you work on collective projects, you're reminded of how much more powerful your ideas can become, even if it's not your own, even if it's somebody else's idea, and you go and support that person to make that a reality. The value of community in photography, I think sometimes we forget about it. And it's something that I advocate for, that sometimes you will
Yeah.
be the lead singer and sometimes you will be carrying somebody else's piano for the concert. It's just to change the roles every now and then. It's also really good.
Yeah, well, on that note of community, we mentioned earlier that in 2021 you founded the mentorship program Semillero Migrante. And according to the Instagram page, this program lasts about 4 months, during which recipients have online sessions on topics such as editing, fieldwork, migration concepts, ethics, and private sessions with a mentor. And I'm particularly curious to learn more about the migration concepts that are covered in this program. We talked about migration a bit earlier, but can you talk more about that and how you approach it with the program that you founded?
The program has been allowing different interpretations of the word migration. So it can be an actual documentary, very straightforward photojournalism project on a group of migrants that go from one place to another, or it can be a more conceptual work about how somebody can feel when they have to remove themselves from their community and start a new life somewhere else. And we have different profiles as well. So we have photojournalists, but then we have, for instance, a poet that was working with archival images and creating a collage for each of his poems. So we have room for different visual artists. We even have one person that was doing a project on how it feels when you migrate within your identity, when you go from female to male. That's also an interpretation that we allowed in the program. And the program will expand. So we think it's important that we're building this archive over time of local voices telling the stories of migration. But we feel like the most important thing of the program is that it's free. It's a free program and it is fully in Spanish, which is very important for us because there's a lot of mentorship programs around, but all these opportunities are in English, which means that it leaves out a bunch of incredible talent in Latin America.
Right.
And so we want to bring these tools to Spanish-speaking photographers. And so now I think we're going to do like different cycles. So we're thinking of doing one cycle for LGBTQ stories in Venezuela. We might do one cycle that it's open for all kind of photographers in Latin America in general. But the important thing is that we give free education fully in Spanish to emerging photographers.
That's amazing. Kudos. It's really wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, there are really, really good projects. One of them just recently got a grant from Polaroid. Another one got the Pride Photo Award. Someone else was in the Picture of the Year Awards. And not because they need to aspire to get awards and anything like that. I think the most important part of the project is the process itself and teach them how to go from one idea to the publication of the idea and what happens in between and all of that. But it obviously makes us feel very proud that they're actually being recognized by all the hard work that they're doing. And we're just very glad that we get to help in that process as well.
Yeah, and building this archive of stories and information, as you say. It's great. So on the podcast, Visual Minds, you talked about a rare event when your whole family met up for a wedding. And this made you realize that your time for being together as a nuclear family is gone, and that this was a huge sacrifice that you had to make. While this is indeed a terrible sacrifice, do you feel that this has perhaps made bonds you've created with professional colleagues and programs like Semillero Migrante even stronger as a chosen family of sorts?
Yes, for sure. For instance, in my 3 years in Bogota, I had this amazing group of friends. Yeah, I think migration really taught me also the importance of friendship. How you call it, I think it's on point. Their chosen family. And having a really good support system around you is the heart when you're going through processes like this. And obviously, also, I think I need to point out that all I can say from my perspective also comes from a background of a certain privilege. I'm a middle class woman from Caracas. So my whole migration process, as painful as it was a decision that I could take whenever I wanted to. And I could just take a plane and go and try to have a life in Bogota and then after in France. And I've been moving around here and there. But I also talk about my experience very conscious of the fact that I don't have to walk 20 days in the jungle to try to find a country where I can get medicines for my son, for instance. And I think that's important that if you're working on a story as sensitive as this one, you don't forget that you're doing it from a privileged point of view as well. Even just the fact that you have the camera and that you are, in a way, taking the narrative of somebody else's story, that is a tremendous responsibility and a tremendous privilege as well. And as photographers, we cannot forget about that specifically.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. So you spent the past year in Paris as a fellow at Columbia University's Institute for Ideas and Imagination. What have you been working on during that year?
I was wrapping up the project I Can Hear the Birds, which is slowly becoming a book. And that is over. That project is done. In the second half, I was doing two things. One was research and pre-production for a new project that's on the works. And then also, because it's very rare to have an opportunity like this one, I decided to do something completely different. So I did a performance with a group of French and Venezuelan actors here in Paris. And it took me out of my comfort zone. It helped my creative process. It had nothing to do with photography. And that was very fun.
Cool.
It also reminded me that I am indeed a photographer. I am not a performer. but
So was it like a dance performance?
It was a contemporary theater piece made with an incredible Venezuelan artist who lives here, Hector Cavallaro. And he wrote these music compositions that wanted to talk about the links between a Venezuelan painter, Armando Reveron, and the Italian painter Caravaggio, and like how their paintings had a dialogue with their shades. So in a way, I think it has something to do with photography because it was a lot about light and shadows, but it was with the body. So very, very different life I had for a few months.
Yeah. That's very cool.
Yeah.
I'm sure that will enrich your future work in lots of ways. So what's next? Will you be returning to Venezuela or Colombia? Or?
Hopefully, I'll be returning to Venezuela to work on some new stuff that I will keep to myself until I have some material. But yeah, there are some ideas. And then again, when I was saying about the importance of silence, I think this year doing this fellowship that wasn't about shooting, it was about reading and editing and working in other parts of the process, really brought to surface things that I didn't really know were within me. And so now I just can't wait to be back on the field.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Fabiola, for your time and speaking with me today and the insights you've shared about Venezuelan culture and your documentation of life there. But before we go, I'd like to end with a short visual questionnaire inspired by the TV show Inside the Actor's Studio. It's a brief list of questions with one-sentence answers. So, Fabiola Ferrero, with all things being equal, is your preference color or black and white?
Color.
Interesting. Which image orientation do you gravitate to more often? Horizontal or vertical or square?
Horizontal.
And what's your lens preference, prime or zoom?
Prime.
Okay. If you could only carry one lens, which would it be?
Well, this is contradictory, but I'll say the 2470 just because it's versatile and I can do everything with it.
Yeah. What one photographer, living or dead, has influenced your work the most?
At the very beginning, Alex Webb, because I was studying composition with his images. Recently, Sophie Calle and Christina de Midden become like really important references for me.
Outside of photography, what profession or craft would you most like to explore?
Writing, without a doubt.
Yeah. And in a single word, what's the biggest motivation for making pictures?
Memory.
So, are there any upcoming projects or plans you can tell us about?
There are projects, but I can't. I will share soon, but I just, maybe it's the anxious woman in me that doesn't like to share stuff that's not there yet. I don't know why I do that, but yeah, I'll share soon.
Okay. And well, what about The Wells Run Dry was published in book form?
Yes, it was a book that the Fondation Carmignac, because they funded the project, they also do the book and the exhibition. So yeah.
And is that publicly available for sale?
It is online, I think, but you need to Google it and see which link comes, because it depends on the country. It might take you to different places.
Right, right. And where can guests find out more about you and your work?
I think my social media, even though I'm not the most active on Instagram, it's my name, just Fabiola Ferrero, you will find me. And occasionally I post a good meme on my stories. So it depends on the mood, you will find different types of content.
One other question about upcoming plans. I was just on your website and I noticed you do individual mentorships or consultations with photographers. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I am a firm believer of the figure of the mentor in general, because I didn't study photography formally, but I did have incredible mentors who helped me along the way. So I had Maggie Stever, I had Sim Chiin, Alice Gabriner, and I had mentors in Venezuela as well, Leo Alvarez, who was very important for me. And that's also why I built Semillero Migrante, which is a program focused on each photographer having a mentor that we choose after we choose the students. So we find them depending on the needs of each individual student. It's very, very personalized, because I feel that photography, it's such a personal journey for everyone. It's very hard for me to see how just going to a school and learning the same thing that everybody's learning would shape me the same way that having an individual mentor that guides you to find your own voice does. To me, that is such an important figure. And so at this point, of course, I feel like I'm still very young in my career, so I don't feel like I would be a mentor that would necessarily shape somebody's vision or anything like that. But I do feel like I have a certain set of skills that I can teach to younger photographers that maybe don't know how to apply for a grant, that maybe haven't done a project in a 6-month period that they need to deliver to somebody. Just teaching how you get from having an idea to actually producing the idea, to finance, to fund your idea, to publish your idea. All those things, I think, if I've learned anything in the past few years, it's that process from within. And I do feel like there's a lot of talent out there that with just a little push and a little bit of guidance, they can have incredible work. And that I would be honored to see that work published somewhere. Maybe it's selfish of me, I just want to see good photography out there. And if maybe somebody's a bit lost and we can collectively push them to do something beautiful, we all get to win, because we'll see great work out there.
Yeah, well, it's important. It's building the community and giving back.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Fabiola Ferrero, thanks again for joining us today and for your passion in telling authentic stories about Venezuelan culture.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the talk. It was good.
Yeah. Yeah, it was good. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed today's show, we'd love to hear about it. Pull up this episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, B&H's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a comment. While you're there, make sure that subscribe button is clicked for automatic updates about every episode release. You can also find us and drop us a line on the Explora blog, where we post photos from our guests along with the show notes. And if you're a fan of social media, please join us on Facebook at the B&H Photography Podcast group, where you can share your favorite photos and comment about the show. I'm Jill Waterman, the podcast creative producer and host of this series. Episodes are recorded, mixed, and edited by technical producer Mike Weinstein. Theme music for this series is composed by Gabriel Richards, and our executive producer is Richard Stevens. On behalf of us all, thank you so much for listening.